Yeah, and I might have to run out to make a phone call, but I'll be right back. Anyway, 5 more minutes. That's 2 more minutes.
So am I good to start? Okay. So the way this started is, I want to say back in 2009, 2010, some time ago, I went down to a book expo at the Javits Center, and they were giving out signed copies of this interesting little book called Wicked Plants. And I was kind of intrigued by it, so I picked it up and I started reading through it, and it was just really interesting. A lot of incredibly good information and very well presented, very accessible. And this book is written by Amy Stewart, and she does a really phenomenal job of creating something that's almost a narrative. But it's very excellent information, and it talks about a lot of plants that just misbehave. So I had this idea it would be really fun to do a presentation, partly based on the information here, and also based on my own knowledge and other things that I had learned some things about over the years. So the first set of plants I'd like to talk about is I've kind of called them Botanical Bullies. These are plants that just, they don't behave well. And the first group of these are the dangerous invasives. And I've got 4 here that I'm highlighting, but this is 4 examples. There are many, many others. And you may know some others, you may be pulling some others out of your own gardens. Killer algae, dodder, kudzu, and purple leaf stripe. Now, killer algae is a very unique one. It's a variation of an algae that grows naturally. But when I say that it evolved in an aquarium, what happened was they took this algae, they were raising it in an aquarium, and it was isolated. And it started to evolve and change. It was under really optimal conditions. It was exposed to a lot of things that natural algae wouldn't be exposed to. And then one day it got away, and it got out into the ocean. What's really interesting about this plant is that it is actually a single-celled organism, which is really hard to wrap your mind around when you look at all the complexity that you see here. But it essentially is. So chopping it up or physically damaging it does no good, because all you're doing is giving it the opportunity to spread.
Spreading it around.
Exactly. So you can see some details in this picture, but that bottom right-hand corner, it can just form giant mats. And it's called killer algae. It doesn't actually kill people. It's not toxic to us, but it does contain a toxin that poisons fish. And that's why it can spread so prevalently, because the fish don't eat it. They can't. It would kill them. So it is a very dangerous invasive. It's very difficult to control. It travels throughout the oceans. So it's a really tough one to handle. And it's an example of how when human beings get involved in something and release something into the wild, really bad things can happen. The next one is dodder. And I chose this one because it is just such an odd and interesting plant. So it is, again, highly invasive. It's actually a plant parasite. And a field that has been overrun with dodder looks like somebody came in and attacked it with silly string. That is actually what it looks like this pink, yellow, orange silly string that just spreads over everything. They've done studies on it, and it seems to actually have a sense of smell. So it actually is attracted to plants that can be a host for it based on something that is very similar to smell. And it will find its hosts and grow over them, and it actually wraps itself around and strangles those plants that it's feeding on.
So this is a plant itself?
It is a plant, but it's not like a green plant. You know,
Okay.
it's similar to like mistletoe and other plant parasites. It has plant characteristics, but it can't survive on its own. It doesn't create it does do some photosynthesis, but very little. Kudzu, a lot of people have heard of this. Again, very pretty flower, but this is so extremely invasive, crazy invasive. There are stories of people sitting there watching the kudzu come and grow over things and shutting your window at night so it doesn't get in and, you know, strangle you. I mean, this stuff, I've seen this grow day to day where you're just, it boggles the mind how fast this grows. And It's an import from China. It was originally considered this miracle worker because it was so effective at controlling erosion. Well, yes, it's effective for controlling erosion because it is incredibly fast growing, and if you look down at the bottom, it has massive taproots. These taproots, they can get to be like 4 feet, 5 feet long. They can weigh, 20, 30 pounds. And again, it's one of those things where if you don't get the whole root, it can regenerate and regrow out of that root. So you may think you got it all, you miss a little bit, next thing you know, it's growing right back. One of the good news about it is edible, and people do eat it as a way of getting revenge, but it's not something that we would necessarily consider a food staple or a food crop, and most programs are trying to eradicate it. There's been some talk of using really heavy-duty pesticides, or herbicides. Obviously, no one wants to do that. There's been talk about importing insects and other parasites that would normally feed on this. But
Just swallow the spider to catch the fly.
well, the problem is that it's a great natural form of control, but we've already introduced something into the ecosystem can't handle, and how sure are we that the fix isn't going to be even worse? So, very dangerous. Excuse me. This is one that I think just about everybody in New York has seen.
Oh yeah.
Purple loosestrife. And it is gorgeous. I mean, you look at this picture and you're like, wow, that's really beautiful, and it is. However, it again is a very highly invasive exotic plant. It came in from Europe as an ornamental. People were growing it in their gardens. It got free. And it is a very fast growing plant that clogs up wetlands and crowds out native plants that the species in our ecosystems depend on for food. Again, another control system that people are thinking about is, okay, well, let's import things that eat it. That would be great, but again, we're messing with ecosystems and we don't necessarily know the repercussions. There's a lot of loosestrife eradication programs that involve physically removing as much of it as possible. You don't want to burn it, you don't want to shred it up, because again, you're just releasing more seeds and more potential for it to spread. So the next group of plants are the thorny characters. I'm sure we've all been bitten by a plant once or twice. Sandburrs. My husband plays a lot of volleyball. He plays beach volleyball and volleyball in fields barefoot. He knew about these before I did. I was talking about them and looking at them, and he's like, oh, I know what those are. Those are terrible. They're evil. And it's like, okay. And then I learned a little bit more about them and saw them myself. And they're very sharp. They grow in sandy soils. They can invade lawns. And what's really interesting is that they can attach to almost any surface. Now, I know a lot of people have seen burdock, and it is said that that's where the idea of Velcro came from. But burdock generally, if at my bare hand, burdock's not going to stick to that. This will. And that's why I have a picture of someone's toe there, where it will stick into skin.
Ooh.
It is very, very tenacious. Those thorns are harder, and they grip. So it's not a plant you want to encounter, but anybody that plays barefoot sports in sandy soil has probably encountered them. Black locust. This is a very common tree in upstate New York, and it can be very pretty. It's extremely fast growing. It can be invasive. There's a kind of an old wives' tale, not an urban legend, I guess you'd call it a rural legend, that a farmer cut down some black locust trees and was going to make himself some fence posts, split the wood, pounded it in, and next year his fence posts were sprouting. That's probably a stretch, but you can cut these down to stumps and have trees regenerate out of the root structures around those stumps.
I've actually done that, had them and put them in for a fence post, and
Yep.
it did come back alive.
It did. Okay, so it's proven.
Now,
Okay.
I know that locusts, at least in downstate New York, in Mount Kisco, locusts, they weren't black locusts, and they were locusts. And they were a plantation because they were used for lolly columns of buildings, and they were used to make the beams of ships. They were used to make the beams
Interesting.
of the Merrimack.
Okay.
Before the Southerns took it over, was built in Mount Kisco out of timber. I don't know if the black locust has those properties, because the reason they would use locusts is because the shit would burn.
Right.
it would not
It's
burn.
also rot resistant. They last for
Okay.
a long time.
I don't
That's
know,
why
does
they're used
locust-
to make good fence posts.
And they grew like weeds, so I'm wondering if locust
It
has
could
kind of the same
be.
properties.
It could be. They have white flowers that hang in these clusters. They have a lot of thorns. So if you see the bottom left picture, these thorns grow 3-4 inches long. They can completely cover a trunk, but there's a lot of variation. Some individual trees will have very few thorns, others will have a lot, but you don't want to put your hand on one of those. They are very sharp. They will penetrate right through a person's hand if you put it on there hard enough. It will go through.
Useful.
Yep. The seed pods are kind of interesting. They sometimes grow straight, sometimes they grow in a little bit of a spiral, and they make like a little rattle sound. And the bark, the seeds, and I shouldn't have said the seeds, I should have said the seed pods. The bark and the seed pods and the wood are poisonous. The seeds themselves are edible, but I don't recommend it because if it gets contaminated with any part of the pod, you're ingesting something poisonous. So it's one of those weird things where the covering of the seed, no good to eat. Very inside, okay to eat. Probably play it safe unless you really know what you're doing. But again, these are very invasive. In the pine barrens right now, they're doing massive clear cutting of black locust because it's been crowding out the natural pines in that area. One of my favorite plants, Rosa rugosa. A few years back, Rob asked me what my recommendations were for an attack shrub to plant in his front yard to deter intruders from coming in through the windows.
No, I want some greenery in front. You suggested a tax shrub.
Well, a lot of people will recommend that you plant barberry in front of your front windows, and you know, barberry is wimpy. If you really want to keep people out of something, and you don't want them climbing through, this is your plant. Rosa rugosa is a very vigorous plant. It can get up to 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide. It has beautiful green foliage. You see it a lot in Cape Cod because it's very salt tolerant. And the flowers are extraordinarily fragrant. I mean, it's a very rich fragrance, a very wide-spreading fragrance. You can usually smell it from some distance. The flowers are quite showy. They're not considered showy by rose standards because you can see they're just a single set, you know, a single rose as opposed to the tea-type roses, but they're still very beautiful. Variations in color range from white, pink, fuchsia, and red. Fuchsia is the most common color. And the rose hips can get to be the size of cherries, and they persist through the winter, so they're beautiful. But what makes these plants a thorny character are the thorns. So these thorns, we're not talking rose thorn, rose thorn, rose thorn, or even barberry where they're spaced out every half inch. The branches look like they're furry. And they are covered in, and they are just covered in thorns. And because they have a somewhat viney growth, unless you're pruning them back, it's the kind of thing where the young branches, it almost feels like it reaches out and wraps around your leg and grabs a hold. So
Wait a minute.
this is, okay.
And my tax shrub that she talked me into, I noticed last year that it somehow formed a runner that went about 10 feet around another tree.
Yep,
Whoa.
yep,
They will.
yep.
Which is kind of fine, but I still cut that runner off in the spring.
They are very good for hedging, and they were very popular for hedging plants. About 7-8 years ago, I was working at OGS, and I think it was up in Canton, up far upstate New York. One of the campuses up there said, well, we have an electrical transformer on a concrete pad, and the kids keep cutting through it. We don't think it's safe. But we don't want a fence because we need access to this in the event of emergency. And you know, fences are a problem because of keys, and we just don't want to do fencing. Can you recommend some sort of shrub we can plant? And I said, sure. So I recommended this, and we didn't have to surround the whole thing, just put it in the path of travel. So I sent them the information on this, and I get a phone call like a day or two later and said, well, we can't plant this plant on campus. And I said, well, why not? And it's like, we're gonna get sued. The kids are gonna, cut through, they're gonna walk through this thing and get like ripped to shreds. And I said, well, they're only gonna do it once. They do it once, they learn their lesson and no more problem. And I said, and you wanted something to deter them, and they were scared. They ended up planting wimpy barberry, which,
You'll find this a lot of times out in the woods if you're going through areas that have been reclaimed as woods from old farmlands.
Okay.
You'll see them in a row where they were used as hedges.
As hedges, yeah. Because is an angry cow gonna burst through this? Yes. Probably. But
They're going to stay back. They don't like the thorns any more than people do. If
Yeah.
there's an easier way, they'll walk a mile to get around it.
True,
Won't go
true.
through it.
But a lot of farm animals aren't gonna go through this. The only animals that you really see going through hedges are really small, where they can squeak in
Go underneath
around the
it.
thorns. So it's a very effective attack shrub. So we have a few that I just thought were really interesting, and I call them the explosive personalities. And I used 3 examples, but there are more out there. So dwarf mistletoe, sandbox tree, and witch hazel. Now the dwarf mistletoe, it's related to the mistletoe, the Christmas mistletoe we're all familiar with. It's a parasite on conifer trees. When the seeds ripen, they take off at 60 miles an hour.
Nice.
Like, just boom, they're bursting out.
This
very
is like
very
touch me not on steroids.
But they're not waiting to be touched. They just ripen,
Rambo.
and it's part of their evolution because of the way they have to spread. They have to get to a new host. So they need to go at a fair distance.
So they're trying to bury themselves in another nearby tree trunk,
Exactly.
basically.
But you don't want to be in the way.
Well, no.
Fortunately, it's usually pretty high up, usually higher than most people's heads. But I've heard, and I've read some of the accounts where it almost, you can hear that cracking sound, and you can hear the sound of them whizzing by.
If you go up in the Adirondacks, and I believe it's Route 3 from Inlet up to Blue Mountain Lake, you'll see a lot of it on the left in the pine trees right on the lakes.
Okay.
Really pretty yellows.
Yeah. So another one, this is not one that we would encounter locally. It's native to South America, called the sandbox tree. And the sap is very caustic. It has thorns, and the thorns are poisonous. And you can kind of see those thorns are pretty scary looking. And the seed pods are very pretty. But again, these seeds explode when they ripen. The seed pods explode open, the seeds shoot out, they can travel 300 feet. So it's, again, something that you don't normally think of a tree shooting at you, but this is an example of a tree that might, if you happen to be near it when those seed pods are ripening. And the last one is a tree we're all familiar with, witch hazel.
Pretty tree.
I did not know this about witch hazel until I was reading this. We know that the extract of the bark and leaves is used as an astringent. It's used in a lot of magical workings as well. And the pods look like acorns, but again, when they snap open, and sometimes it sounds like the crack of a whip, or the crack of or almost a gunshot, but it's, I think, more of like a whip crack sound. And they launch them up to 30 feet. So they get those seeds out there, and it's a way of spreading their progeny. But again, I did not know that about witch hazel until I was reading this. And I was like, wow, witch hazel is a plant that I think of myself as being somewhat familiar with, and here was something brand new that I learned about it.
Are there particular times of the year when you have to watch out for these plants? Or?
Yes, I don't know when they ripen. My guess would probably be October, November. Usually it's later, because witch hazel, isn't witch hazel one that blooms twice?
It blooms in the fall.
Yeah, it blooms in the fall. So I think it's probably the fall bloom would be my
Mine
guess.
blooms in like the beginning of November,
Yeah.
Yeah, that late.
because we're way up north. So.
And the seeds are usually out in the springtime.
Oh, are they?
They're
Okay.
opposite cycles for most trees. So the
Oh,
seeds that come out
okay.
in the spring,
Okay.
they've ripened over the winter.
Oh, so it's the first.
Yeah,
round.
it's one of the first fruits that you're gonna find from
Yeah.
a tree.
Okay. So beware in spring. Tiptoeing around your witch hazel. Give it about 30 feet. If you're outside the 30-foot range, you're probably safe. So.
Do you have any videos of any?
No, I did not have any videos.
I'm sure there are YouTube videos.
YouTube. So here's some that are just plain irritating. So the toxicodendrons, which are poison oak, poison ivy, poison sumac. stinging nettles, cashews, and giant hogweed. So poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac are not at all. And the only reason that they're called these things is because of the shape of their leaves resembling these other plants. Now, they are not actually toxic. They produce an oil, urushiol, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the problem with this oil is that most human beings are simply highly allergic to it. Not everybody. It said, when I was looking it up, 15 to 20% of the people are immune. I thought it was much lower than that, but why take a chance? You know, why gamble? But basically, it's simply an allergic reaction. And for some people, that allergic reaction can be very extreme. Most people that are allergic, you get bumps, itchy, oozing, sores. And the sooner you wash it off, the better. But most people don't realize they've touched it until they've already broken out.
And it can be brought in the house by cats or dogs.
Yeah. One of the tests to see if you're dealing with one of the toxicodendrons is to take white paper, pure white paper, and with a gloved hand, rub it against the leaf. It'll actually develop a brown stain if urushiol is present. So you can kind of test it that way. But how many of us are bringing slips of paper with us into the woods? Oh, I don't know if I want to touch that. Let me check, you know. I mean, if you're camping in the woods and you're depending on leaves for like toilet paper, then in that case you might want to bring a few little slips just to test and be sure. You know,
Ferns work much better.
I'm sorry?
Ferns work much better.
Yes,
Just say.
yes, and safer. Safer, absolutely. Stinging nettles. So there's acids that are actually causing the reaction in stinging nettles. And the picture here, I'm showing you the leaves, and I'm also showing a close-up of the stem. So stinging nettles, these acids, once they get in contact with the skin, they cause this reaction. If you brush up against the leaves, the hairs on the leaves are like little tiny needles that contain this acid. They only go in a tiny little bit, and they tend to cause raised bumps and an itchy, burning kind of feeling. The real problem is that if you see the hairs on the stem, they are significantly longer, they're thicker, they contain more of this substance, and it will go far deeper into your skin. And I can speak from personal experience. I had nettle rash many, many times from brushing up against the leaves. And then one day, I fell into one, like against my leg, and I hit the stem, and I had massive welts on the side of my calf that burned and felt numb all at the same time and swelled up in big patches. And just I had a little bit of nettle rash around the outside. And I thought I had hit something completely different, and my dad said, no, you just hit the wrong part of the plant. Well, this plant doesn't really have a right part. But it is extremely nutritious. If you get it when it's very young and you're very careful about picking it, and you boil it so you get rid of all the hairs, the leaves are edible, and they are very, very nutritious. They have a lot of nutrients in them. Honestly, I would probably eat them if they were prepared by someone I trusted who knew what they were doing, but I don't think I would take the chance of doing it myself and risk not getting everything off. You know, I tend to be cautious that way. Now, this is really interesting. How many people here have eaten cashews? Yeah. So, has anybody here gone to the store and seen cashews sold as raw cashews? No. Okay. Some stores do sell it when they're lying. Because the only way to safely harvest cashews and make sure that they're not going to hurt anybody is to steam them open. So they may not be roasted or heavily cooked, but they're all steamed to a certain extent. Because you can see how they're growing here. That's called a cashew apple. And then there's the cashew itself grows at the bottom of it. And the shell around it contains the same thing, the same chemicals or very similar chemicals that are in poison ivy, poison sumac, and poison oak. So you wouldn't want to eat cashews if they still had that present. And it's very, the process that they do for steaming them open, it's pretty good. I mean, most of the commercially bought cashews that you have are going to be just fine. But there have been a few isolated stories where pieces of the shell have accidentally been left in. to the processing, and it's caused people to break out because of that allergic reaction. So, I mean, I had no idea that that's how cashews grew, but it's kind of a neat picture. Giant hogweed.
Yeah.
About 5 or 6 years ago, there was an article in our local newspaper about this. And this one I genuinely want to warn people about. If you see something that looks like Queen Anne's lace on steroids,
Yeah.
do not touch it. Do not go near it. Stay away from it and call the DEC.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because they will come and they will remove it. It can be invasive, it's pretty fast growing. It's not highly invasive, like you don't see tons of it. But what it can do to human beings, to human skin, is really horrible. So the upper picture with those really
Dermatitis.
huge blisters, dermatitis, it can cause that just by casual contact. If those kind of exposures are exposed to sun, it can cause third-degree burns.
Yeah, it grows wild out by my road, right by my house, and I refuse to mow it even with a brush hog. It's
No,
just-
I would, no, stay.
They come and take it down about every month.
Okay.
And it's really, it just comes right back up again.
Yeah, it's very, and it can cause long-term photosensitivity. So if you're exposed and, you know, it clears up and it looks like you're fine, years later, you can be exposed to sunlight and get like an extreme sunburn as for me. Even if you're not. But it can cause photosensitivity. It can cause staining of the skin when exposed to
Yeah.
sunlight. It's very dangerous. Yep.
So, from what I know, this is relatively new around this area. Do you know where it's originally from?
I actually don't. I know that it may even be a native plant, and
Yeah, we have it in New Hampshire.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been around for a long time that I remember. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, it's getting out now where it's growing along the roads
I know,
because it's found a
they
good
were
spot to
having
grow.
a big fit about it like 10 years ago
Yeah.
in New Hampshire.
yeah, I think that it's just a matter that it wasn't growing extensively,
To the party.
and now it's spreading more, and more people are getting exposed to it. And I think that the biggest problem is that it looks so much like things we think of as innocuous. I mean, it's related to carrots and anise.
Plus, you know,
and,
I think a big part of the problem is more places are getting developed that
Yeah.
people didn't used
that's
to go
true
to.
too.
So they, you know, they suddenly put a housing development in and someplace where that was growing that nobody ever went before. you know.
Right.
It was from.
Comes from New Zealand.
Oh, it was an import from Asia?
And it was brought to Britain in the 19th century and then later to the United States and Canada.
Yeah. I don't know why they would bring it anywhere.
Might not have done it on purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
Might have
Oh.
done plant bedding or something.
Because, I mean, you can say it's pretty, but given how severe the reaction is to it, I wouldn't put this in my garden. Nothing would even inspire me to put this in my garden.
You know it's bad when the New York State DEC has got a whole page on giant hogweed.
They do.
Yeah.
They're like, call us.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it was
Oh,
in the
it was brought in as
newspaper.
an ornamental plant.
A lot of really stupid things are brought in as ornamental. Oh, heaven help us.
That's okay, starlings were deliberate import too.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, so if you see anything that looks even remotely like this, if you see something that looks like Queen Anne's lace but bigger, call the DEC. Even if it turns out not to be this, you're safer just not touching it, staying away from it, because it is really horrific. So, then moving on to horticultural criminals. So, there are plants out there that, believe it or not, are criminals. They're outlaws. They're illegal.
So magic mushrooms.
No, there's plants out there
don't
that
you get one
humans
up?
don't use properly.
Don't you get one up when you
The
eat one?
plants are criminals.
So here's the interesting thing. So people think of magic mushrooms, and they usually think of that one at the bottom left, but that's actually not the mushroom we're talking about. It's not the Alice in Wonderland mushroom. That's actually fly mushroom. So they are intoxicating. There's a lot of species of them, and the really scary thing is that they have a lot of seriously poisonous lookalikes. So you might think you're just going for something to get a little bit of a buzz or get, have some fun trip, and you could actually eat something that's truly deadly. And mushrooms in general, I know they're not really plants, they're fungus, but the really scary thing with identifying mushrooms is that in the wild, you know, edible mushroom grows right next to poisonous mushroom and they look the same. And you know, you have to be such an expert to know what you're looking at. And these are technically against the law. So.
What's the phrase? There are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters. There are no old, bold mushroom hunters.
There you go.
Like I said, I don't wild harvest.
So the opium poppy, illegal plant. Now the interesting thing is that this is a plant that, while technically not legal, is not restricted at all. You can pretty much buy seeds for this in any garden store. And the reason is opium is not really sourced locally. You know, people are not growing poppies to harvest opium. It's not happening. So, and they are such a beautiful garden flower, and they are very, very popular. And it's not as though exposure to the plant or eating the seeds is how you get the opium. You have to let the pods form, and then what they do is they slice the pods, the resin comes out, the resin hardens, and they harvest that. So it's somewhat labor intensive. Not to say that you couldn't do it in your own backyard if you really wanted to, but hasn't really been something that anybody's cracked down on. You know, it's not like they're raiding Hewitts to say, you're selling opium poppy seeds. Not really happening. Khat. So this is, this is native to Africa, and you don't hear about it too much here in the United States, but it's kind of interesting. The leaves are consumed fresh. It causes a kind of, what they described it as, a clear-headed euphoria. You know, it's not that you're not aware of everything, you just don't care. You're still fully aware of everything that's going on. You're not in a daze. You just don't give a shit.
It's all good.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. But the leaves lose their potency after 48 hours. So the way that the people that sell this stuff is they harvest it and they instantly have to get this stuff to market, like that fast. And there was a story in this book about a pilot who got shot down or something, and he was trying to get space on a plane where they were smuggling this, and he had to pay his way as if he was caught, like his weight replacing this.
Right.
That was the only way that they would give him a ride, because they weren't going to lose any money off of it. So, you know, it's not something I've ever heard about here, but I found it very interesting that it's this race. You know, we pick the seeds, we got to get them to market really fast because it doesn't keep, it has no shelf life.
They usually talk about that as being given to workers, so the workers don't mind working in a farm all day. And
That's
what
true.
why they buy it. It's just to keep the working people happy, so they don't care.
Mm-hmm. But they have to make sure that they control the quantity, because you give them too much and they don't even care to move.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Beauty cactus. So there is an exception in the law for Native American ceremonies. It does induce hallucinations. The experiences can vary widely. Some people have extremely positive experiences, and other people have nightmares from hell. In the wild, it's very rare to find this anymore. It's an example of something that was way over-harvested. And again, like any other mind-altering substance, there's dangers involved in it. And it's an interesting story with it, with exceptions being made for Native American rituals, because then you had some groups forming sort of churches
of
about
peyote.
it. It's a fine line. You know, it's really hard. There's a lot of people that can manipulate things. But what I thought was really sad is how this was once not extremely common, but it was part of the native ecosystem. And now, because of people wanting to take advantage of it for its mind-altering properties, it's difficult to find anymore and could become extinct. So it's kind of sad.
Very strange
Marijuana.
looking cactus.
So marijuana is a pretty common one. Right now it's legal in some states, but the sale and possession is still against federal law, which is really kind of odd. It's a relative to hops. Again, this is something that I heard stories of how people growing it very carefully in their closet and hiding it, yet you grow it in a field and it just takes off and does a wonderful thing. And what people don't realize is that certain varieties of birdseed include seeds for this stuff.
And it does grow wild in New York State.
George Washington had a really big marijuana farm. They built Washington D.C. on it.
There was a story when I was in code class. I don't know how this came up in our code class, but
What's code?
building codes.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, because I'm a code enforcement officer for New York State. And when I was taking my basic training for building codes, the teacher was talking about how he knew somebody that did eradication programs where they would find this stuff growing and then they would burn it. So he said the interesting thing is that it's amazing how many officers felt that they needed to be there on the burning day, and how many of their friends came along. And it would be like this big event. Like imagine a marijuana bonfire. It's basically what they did. And I was just thinking, what was downwind?
Elementary school.
Happy people.
Very happy people.
Elementary school, senior center.
Empty grocery stores.
Quite possibly.
I saw an article today that one of the GOP representatives introduced a bill into the House of Representatives to repeal the marijuana inclusion in the banned substances.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
said, it looks like it has a chance of passing, so we'll see what happens federally.
Good. Well, Jeff Sessions says that he believes that good people do not smoke marijuana.
Right.
And Jesus appointed him, so we have to listen to him. I shouldn't say this, we're on
Well,
camera, aren't we?
marijuana actually does have medicinal benefits.
Yeah.
There are uses for it, and when you look at its effects on people, and when you look at its history, and then you look at the history of alcohol and the effects on people, it's I've heard a lot of things like it's the gateway drug and all of that, but
No, there's good historical markers that the main forces behind its illegalization were the timber industry and the tobacco industry.
yeah.
Oh, good old racism.
They
too.
both wanted their competition
Yeah.
illegalized, basically. So.
No, I can understand that. And, in terms of the smoking of it, I never understood the smoking of it for medicinal benefits. It always seemed to me like there had to be a better delivery system. And finally, they are looking at something that to me just made sense, because I understand that when it's ingested, the effects are far harder to predict.
It's also very difficult to prepare. All right, I don't know this. I know this because my brother-in-law is a chef.
Okay.
Marijuana's fat soluble. If you
Okay.
want to cook it in anything, you gotta slow cook it in butter.
Mhm.
Like, it's really difficult to make pot brownies. It's really difficult. It's a lot easier just to roll it up and smoke it.
Yep.
I can tell you on the pharmaceutical end of things,
Mhm.
there is research into THC, which is the active
Mhm.
ingredient here, for medicinal purposes, and making it a little more predictable. I can't remember whether they were going for oral or if they were going for transdermal as the method of delivery, though.
Well, that was one of the things that was interesting to me, because I had heard people say that when it's absorbed through the lungs, it's a bit more controlled versus when it's absorbed through the digestive system, that you don't necessarily know how much you're getting until you've gotten too much. But my mother was asthmatic for many years, and she used an inhaler. So it occurred to me, well, can't this substance be reduced to something that could be used in an inhaler, so you're not inhaling smoke particles? Because I have a real concern about inhaling smoke particles.
Yes.
Unfortunately, THC is a rather large molecule.
Oh.
Yeah, but you can get cash oil vaporizers and
Yep.
stuff already.
Right.
Yeah, and I take a vitamin D supplement, and I get no vitamin D naturally. It doesn't happen. I'm too pale. But I was taking oral supplements and they weren't working, and now I take a supplement that I spray under my tongue, and now my vitamin D levels are controlled. So I assume vitamin D is a fairly significant kind of molecule. So it just seems to me like there's got to be better ways. But I think that so much concern was the legality that there wasn't that much exploration. But again, also, it's the source of hemp. I mean, it's a very useful plant, so.
My understanding is that hemp and cannabis are like first cousin plants, but not actually the same thing.
There's strains.
Okay.
There's different strains of it.
They're like varietals?
So, yeah, and
Okay.
the ones that make the best twine make the crappiest pot, and vice versa. So it's not really the same
It
plant,
also
but
makes like, it can make twice as much pulp for paper as opposed to compared to using wood.
Yeah.
It might they do a lot of,
yep, it's easy to grow except in your closet. So,
well, there's kind of no stuff in the closet.
so coca, native to South America. We know this stuff as cocaine. In South America, the leaves are chewed as a mild stimulant. It's like caffeine, you know, it's like getting that shot of espresso for us. It's not an extreme thing for them. And in fact, the leaves have a lot of nutritional value. There's a lot of good stuff in those leaves. It also contains cocaine, and when it's extracted and condensed, it is highly addictive.
It also was part of the original formula of Coca-Cola.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And the
So are the
original
leaves
ingredient
themselves addictive?
Probably
think so.
about as addictive as caffeine is.
Yeah, I can speak from personal experience.
Oh, okay.
I went to Peru
Mhm.
and into the mountains into Cusco, and it's grown, there, and it's very common. You can chew the leaves. It feels like a shot of espresso.
Mhm.
So I don't know, I didn't find myself feeling addicted to it. That being said, it's fairly common, for people in that area. They use it quite often.
Yep.
Teas, just chewing the leaves. So, but its effects just felt like caffeine.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it didn't
when I
feel-
had read about it, everything was equating it to caffeine.
Yeah,
and
that's a
some
good way
people
to
are
say.
addicted to caffeine. Maybe
Yeah.
even some of the people in this room. So I think it's similar to that in terms of its addictive
But
property.
it's just the incredible concentration.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing that, and again, this is like a personal bias of mine because I prefer natural sources of medicinals wherever it's reasonable to do. I realize that dosing is something of an issue, but I tend to think that when you isolate an active ingredient and you take it out of the plant that it's from, you're changing something. Cannabis would like to weigh in here.
Pharmaceuticals, we have found this to be the issue. There's a few examples where the older drugs have worked better and have less side effects because they weren't they hit more than one target or they weren't as pure.
Right.
And the newer drugs are just so targeted that we have all these side effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard from, my friend's mother has MS and she got, it's like some kind of a THC from pot, but it's made into a pill form. But it doesn't
Marinol.
work as good as just smoking pot.
It's called
It just doesn't
Marinol.
work for her.
Yeah, Marinol. Yeah, we've given it in like cancer, to people who have cancer. It's common to give Marinol, but they say I've talked to cancer patients. So I'm a nurse, so I've given it to cancer patients, and they have said that they felt it was like not even half as effective as
Real problem.
marijuana.
She said you
There's
could-
also it's one study, I think it was at master's level,
Okay.
but it was, documented peer-reviewed literature that at least one study where they determined that artemisinin could be delivered more effectively as an infusion of dried wormwood than it could after being solvent extracted from the plant and administered pure.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. The plants, there's already so many other things in there that are balancing it out. But for much of our medical and pharmaceutical history, we've gotten to this idea, well, I need to find the active ingredient. And if I can just find that.
The active ingredient.
And then
Isolated
even
ingredient.
better, if I can synthesize it so
Yeah.
I don't have to harvest it.
Right.
So I can patent the synthesis method.
Well, I hope it's not exclusively from the patent point of view. I'm hoping.
I think that's a factor.
I'm sorry.
In the industry, yeah, it's
It's-
very much based on how can I make money off of this?
Yeah.
And
You
they
can't
like
patent the
getting
plant.
a patent as long as they can, because it's only a 20-year patent. And
Okay,
they need to have it before they go to clinical.
okay. Wow.
And clinicals can take at least 5 years.
So now we get to some of the really fun ones. Now we talked about some other intoxicants on the criminal list. but we've also got some herbal intoxicants, and some of these are common to us, and some of these are not. They're more exotic. This one's going to be really gross. So the beetle nut, it's an addictive stimulant. It is not local. I believe it's from South America. But it has alkaloids in it that are kind of similar to nicotine in tobacco, but it does a couple of really strange things. It causes the saliva glands to just open up full throttle. It like turns you into a drooling mess. It also stains the saliva very dark red, almost like blood, but you're not bleeding. It just stains the saliva, and it ultimately stains the teeth black. But places where beetle nuts are chewed, you see on the sidewalks and on the side of the road just splatters of red from, because there's no other choice. You can't swallow. You've got to just spit this stuff out.
Like a zombie movie.
If you're looking for something interesting to do during your next Morgan devotee, consider using
I don't think so.
Yeah, little skip.
the ethics and ritual.
It was just so extreme, and apparently it is highly addictive, but then so is nicotine. So it really wasn't that surprising. It was just like such an extreme example of just, ew, just had to include that one. Bison grass, it's native to both Europe and North America. It's actually the source of the blood thinner coumarin, and it's a flavoring of certain traditional Polish vodkas. Yeah. Zubralka, I'm probably pronouncing that badly. Apparently it adds a certain kind of flavor to it, and sometimes you'll actually see a few strands in the bottle. You know, actually put the strands in there. It's supposed to have a slightly enhancing effect. I suspect it's because it's thinning the blood more, so you're experiencing the alcohol more strongly would be my theory behind that.
I wonder if it tastes like vanilla, because sweetgrass has coumarin in it, and it gives it kind of this
Oh, that could
almost
be.
vanilla kind of flavor.
I'd actually describe it as grassy.
Grassy?
I've had some Bison Grass vodkas. I would
Yeah.
describe it as very, vegetal in the lawn just got mowed away.
Oh, wow. Lawnmower juice.
So
Tasty with oranges.
sweet woodruff, it has two separate Latin names, but it's really the same plant. They just haven't decided.
Sometimes they retaxonomize things too.
Yeah. It's a very common ornamental ground cover. Even if you didn't recognize it, you've probably come across it in the past. And it's the source of a drink called May wine. And
I've made it.
You've made May wine?
Yeah.
So would you like to describe?
It doesn't, I don't think it, to me, it didn't, really wasn't like a big change in the taste of the wine, the white wine.
Do you think it enhanced the intoxicating effects?
I guess maybe I didn't use a lot. I mean, you can only put so much in.
Well, that's just it, because
you
in
know.
high doses it causes
Yeah,
death.
I mean, we just
So,
put a
you know,
handful,
you gotta
just put a handful in a bottle, you know, you're not putting like, packet of,
yeah,
you're not making a tincture, you know
right,
what I mean?
right.
So you didn't really, it didn't make much of a difference. I'm
Okay.
not a big I don't like white wine, so
Okay.
I really didn't like it that much, but I don't like white wine anyway. But the people that like white wine, they thought it was fine.
Okay.
It didn't taste funny to them or anything.
And they didn't say, wow, that was really
No.
trippy wine.
No.
I can buy it
think you really
commercially
gotta-
in most of the big liquor
Yeah.
stores.
I
There's
don't know if it'd be the same thing commercially. Again, sometimes when people do things commercially.
big
kind of
signs
do-
on it, made with sweet woodruff.
Oh, really?
They're
Okay.
Yeah, they sell it.
Brother
They sell
Wineries
it.
down in the Finger Lakes.
Oh,
Does
interesting.
it every year and has a May wine.
Yeah, I thought.
I had heard of May wine, but I'd never seen it. So. Here's one that you may not know about, Morning Glory. So, about a decade ago, garden centers were noticing that a lot of teenagers were buying plant seeds, specifically Morning Glory seeds. They were thinking, wow, the next generation of gardeners is really getting excited about this.
Now you puke your guts out.
Not so much. So the seeds do come out, contain small amounts of lysergic acid, amide. It causes an LSD kind of hallucination, but it does also cause severe nausea, vomiting, and a whole bunch of other unpleasant side effects. And I mean, the flowers are beautiful. Again, this is commonly available. I really wouldn't recommend it. I think it was just a fad, because I haven't heard much about it recently, but I do remember like a decade or so ago.
There were stupid kids trying it back in the 60s.
Oh, was it back then too?
Definitely,
Okay.
no. I mean,
I thought all the
just
seeds
puking their
started
nuts
being
out.
treated though after that, so that people wouldn't eat them.
Yeah.
There's
Wouldn't
warnings
or
on
shouldn't?
morning.
Really?
No, there's warnings on the morning glory seeds that they've been treated to prevent ingestion.
And ate
It's not for human
morning
I know
ingestion.
somebody did in
I
high
had to
school,
be
and
rushed
she
to
was
the
so
hospital and have his stomach pumped, and that, but they coat the seeds with
Yeah.
various chemicals,
The-
like
the
it was
poison they put
super
on 'em,
stupid to
they-
begin with.
Yeah, especially, anything that you get sold in a seed packet that says treated with Miracle Grow.
Right.
Ew.
Don't eat that.
Like the seeds are like neon blue or something.
Should be
Not 'cause
obvious.
the flowers are gonna be blue.
Henbane is a plant some people are familiar with. It's native to North Africa and Mediterranean Europe. It supposedly has a very foul odor. It's not like a, ooh, what a, stop and smell the roses. Apparently not so much with this one. It was allegedly a key ingredient in the witch's flying potion. And it does have intoxicating effects when ingested and distilled or inhaled. Now, Rob, I think did you use that once as a bittering agent?
No, I still have that packet of seeds at home.
You were just talking about it.
Yes.
Okay. So again, it's one of those things that can enhance the intoxicating effects of alcohol or be intoxicating on its own. A lot of things with these intoxicating plants is dosage. A little can be intoxicating and a lot can be deadly. And it's kind of hard sometimes to know where that line is. I'm sorry?
Therapeutic margin. It's
Yeah.
a phrase I picked up when I was living with an aromatherapist.
And then here's a plant that anybody who's ever heard about absinthe know about, wormwood. I had a friend who made a big deal about saying he had scored some absinthe. This was many years ago. And he said, yeah, it contains wormwood, and wormwood is illegal. You can't get wormwood. I'm like, sure you can.
One thing,
And he
it's all
goes,
over the place.
No, you can't. And I said, let's go to the garden center. I'll buy you some. He was shocked that you could buy this. And I'm like, yeah, it's a pretty common garden plant. There's a lot of varieties of it. Obviously some have more fujone in them than others. And really, the high that you're getting from absinthe has nothing to do with fujone. It's just that it's a really high concentration of alcohol because the amounts are so trace that it really wouldn't have much of an effect. And, too high of a dose is going to cause, seizure, death. Again, something you want to be careful with. And I always tell friends of mine who garden that depending on the plants you're gardening, this one being one of them, you should wear gardening gloves. This stuff will go through the skin. For most of us adults, it's fine, but if you're pregnant, you definitely don't want to be touching this. I had a friend, she had a related plant, lamb's ears, all along her garden. And I said, Leon, because she was trying to get pregnant, and I said, wear gloves, don't touch this with your bare skin, just don't.
It looks kind of like sage, doesn't it? It's very soft.
Yeah, the lamb's ears, they feel like they're fuzzy, they're soft. And a lot of things like this are planted, especially in our area, in gardens, as a way of deterring deer. Because deer don't like eating fuzzy stuff. So lamb's ears, very soft and fuzzy.
Yeah, but
keeps the
lamb
deer-
ears is stockies, which is a whole different genus.
But it still
wormwood.
has substances in it that can absorb through the skin.
Oh.
So I just steer clear of all that. And to be honest, especially if you're pregnant or if you have any sensitivities to things, there's so many things in your garden that skin contact can absorb. It's just safer to wear gardening gloves unless you know exactly what you're touching and you know it's okay to touch. Also, just a side note, I used to do some landscape design on the side. I still do occasionally. And I was meeting with this one couple, and they wanted to build a raised gardening planter for vegetables and herbs. And I said, oh, that's great, but don't use pressure-treated lumber, because that leaches in.
If you're gonna eat it.
And the husband goes, oh, no problem. I have these old railroad ties I'm going to use. And I was like, no, bad, very, very bad. Don't use those. Not food safe. Because these things leach into the soil and leach into the plant, and then when you cut it, you're eating that. So it's, be careful. Mandrake. So this is another one that has a lot of mythological overtones. The root can grow very long, 3 to 4 feet. It was a key ingredient in ancient sleeping potions, and it contains things that will slow down the nervous system and induce a coma. Again, you know, a small amount, probably not going to hurt you, but where do you draw that line?
And atropine is also a major constituent of belladonna.
It's much smaller amounts in mandrake.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll bring us to the last section, natural born killers.
Woohoo!
So some fiends from foreign lands. These are plants that you will not see necessarily growing around your own garden, although some may have been imported. Curare, upas tree, Calabar bean, deadly nightshade, and rosary pea. A lot of things are called nightshade, are in the same family, but are not necessarily the deadly nightshade that is associated with the poison. Not to say that they don't have poison in them, but not at the same concentrations. So curare, it's been used as an arrow poison. It contains a muscle relaxant, native to South America. It's used by the natives there when they are hunting. And one of the advantages of it is that it causes paralysis, monkey falls out of the tree, but once it's eaten, it's harmless. It's not a poison that absorbs through the digestive tract. So they can hunt with this, it can kill their prey, and they don't have to worry about suffering any ill effects when they eat the meat. So it's one of the advantages of this. And because it causes paralysis, it's sort of instantaneous when it hits the bloodstream. So the animal drops, and then they can finish the kill. And very useful for hunters. Upas tree, there's a lot of legends about this one. One of the legends was that this tree could kill from miles away. I really doubt that that's true, but apparently it does give off fumes, and some people who are sensitive to it could probably be very uncomfortable. I'd probably be one of those people.
Yeah, you would.
With my luck. Native to Asia, so I'll have to keep an eye out for that if I ever go to Asia. The bark and leaves contain an alkaloid that can stop the heart, and there were different stories about executions being held by tying a person to the tree until they died, until the fumes killed them. Or maybe they just starved to death. I don't know for sure. Very cheery. This is the Calabar bean, and this was used as an ordeal poison. What's really interesting about this ordeal poison, I don't know if you guys know the history behind ordeal poisons, but the idea was if you were accused of a crime, you took the poison. If you lived, that meant the gods granted that you were innocent. And if you died, you were obviously guilty, and the execution was all taken care of, nice and neat. Calabar bean, we suspect, may have been a little bit more accurate than most ordeal poisons, because if you believed in your innocence, I'm innocent, take that bean, eat it, maybe chew it once, swallow it whole, might make you a little sick, but then it would pass right through you, and you'd live. But if you were guilty, you might eat it really slowly and drag out the process. And by doing that, more of the oils, more of the active ingredients would get into your digestive system to ensure that you died.
So lots of sociopaths went free.
Possibly, yes. But the poison actually works like a nerve gas. It kills the nerves. So nasty, nasty thing. But it was interesting because I've heard a lot about trial by ordeal, and this was the first time I had ever heard something where, this may have actually been a little bit accurate at times. Really? Okay. And that was why. Deadly nightshade. So a lot of people have heard legends about this one. Legend has it that it was used by women. They would take a tincture of it and put it into their eyes to dilate the pupils because that was considered to be more beautiful. I don't know that necessarily is a look of beauty today, but most people just think you're stoned.
Or you can have your eyes dilated at the doctor's office.
Yeah. I guess the eye doctors could be using this.
No, they do use it. That's what they use.
They use the same thing, really?
Yep.
I did not know that. Wow, that's intriguing.
So sexy, like she just came from the eye doctor.
She takes real good
Her
care.
retinas are looking really good.
So it can cause rapid heart rate, confusion, hallucinations, seizures. There's a lot of stories about people who have died. There was a story about a family that the children ate the berries, and over the course of the week, 5 children in the family died. Another story that this elderly woman baked some into a pie and was rushed to the hospital, and I think they saved her. But don't eat the berries. Just
My understanding is that 1 or 2 berries from this are not usually going to be dangerous to most people, but they probably will make you fairly sick.
yeah.
There's also a fairly well-known story in Drawing Down the Moon.
Oh,
They have an interview with a woman named Sharon Devlin, who says that at one point, as part of a vision quest, she found herself standing surrounded by belladonna, and since she'd had this vision that whatever came to her hands she could take home, she took a bunch of it home. And she decided to make a flying ointment. And the story she tells is that she didn't really know what she was doing, and she used like isopropyl alcohol instead of spirits of wine in order to extract it. And got enough under her fingernails making the preparation that if somebody else hadn't found her and known who to call, she probably would have died just getting it on her hands while she was working with it.
wow, yeah.
It used to be popular back in the 60s that there was a asthma medicine that had belladonna in it. Yeah, it was
Wow.
a prescription, and people would, it was in a capsule, and they would open it up, and you would take so many of a certain color, the little dots in the thing, and they would eat them and get pretty buzzed and be out for like 24 hours. I mean, and have wicked hallucinations really badly. But the weird thing was it gave you, it must have done something to your brain, because people had very strange, like when you see into the future, kind of
Prophetic
psychic
visions.
experiences that came true, that
Wow.
actually came true. And that's why people were doing it, because it was so freaky, But and then, when you hear about it being used in witches' ointment,
Mm-hmm.
then you wonder if maybe that was part of the appeal or something,
Very likely. Well, I mean, anything that causes hallucinations often
What?
has an appeal.
Did it help their asthma?
Yeah, no, when it was processed, it opened up your lungs so you could breathe better. But,
Interesting. I had not heard of it being used in an asthma medication.
Yeah, it was used-
Atropine, the
used years ago.
extract, World Health Organization actually considers it one of the essential supplies for like a reasonably well-stocked hospital or emergency center. It's also one of the few things that can counter the effects of nerve gas.
That is interesting. I had read that there are some things that are poisonous, but they are the antidote for another poison,
Yeah.
which is very counterintuitive, but is actually the way it works. This is the rosary pea. Not anything we would see local. It's a tropical vine. As you can see from the little bead-like, it's a red pea with a little black dot on it, kind of like a ladybug, and very shiny. Very popular in jewelry making. But it contains a toxin that can take a few hours or a few days to kill you. You don't necessarily know you've been poisoned until you start to feel the effects. It essentially prevents your cells from making proteins. And because they're so small and they're used in jewelry making, people can bring them home, kids chew on them. It doesn't take much. The jewelry makers run a great risk too, because they're drilling these little holes through these peas, and if they just pinprick themselves, that's
Could
it.
kill themselves.
Yeah. Won't necessarily know it right away, but in a few hours or a few days. So very, very dangerous. I can't imagine why they're still being used, but I mean, they are pretty, but definitely
Cheap,
not something.
presumably.
Cheap, but very dangerous. A lot of things in the natural world that are pretty are very dangerous. We've got some homegrown assassins too. So Coratillo, it's a native plant found fairly commonly in the American Southwest. The berries contain a toxin that causes a delayed kind of paralysis. There were problems with livestock eating this, and suddenly the livestock would become quadriplegic. Suddenly the legs would stop working, you'd see livestock just falling down. And doesn't necessarily take effect right away. And eventually, that paralysis affects the lungs, affects the heart, and the animal dies. Again, don't eat the berries. It's like, if you see something, don't grab a handful and eat it. To me, it seems like common sense.
Always
but
a good, first step. Don't eat the berries.
don't eat the berries. Just step one, don't eat the berries. You're better off.
Never eat anything that particular shade of red.
But the interesting thing that I found to this is that it's delayed. So you feel you're fine, and then all of a sudden, maybe the next day is when you feel the effects, and you may not even put two and two together as to why. The death cat mushroom, highly, highly deadly. Half of one of these can kill an adult. I mean, it's an extremely poisonous fungus. And even if you survive, you can end up with liver and kidney damage.
Those grow all around here.
They do. And if you think about it, you look at that mushroom, that doesn't look all that different from the white button mushrooms that most of us cook with.
Don't wild harvest mushrooms.
Yeah. Rule number 2, don't harvest wild mushrooms.
You have to
Don't eat the
really
berries,
know what you're doing.
Don't eat the mushrooms. 2 rules of thumb.
The crotch harvest, sounds different.
Don't poison poison ivy.
Oleander, common garden plant, not so much up here, but further south, it grows very well. I have friends, again, that have hedges of oleander. It's not so much that people would eat it, but we have heard cases of people cutting branches to make skewers for roasting vegetables and meat. And it migrates from the skewer into the meat and vegetables you're roasting and kills you just as quick.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, with any plants that have active ingredients where the plant is poisonous, I just recommend being careful when you handle it. If you get scratched, are you going to die? Probably not. But why take a chance? You're handling something, wash your hands. Wear gardening gloves. Just be conscious of the fact that our skin is a permeable membrane. Things can get through it. And if you break and you have blood contact with something and you're not sure, you just should take precautions. Rob was pointing out another similar plant, rhododendrons. Beautiful plant, very common. You don't want to eat rhododendron honey. It's not, they're not edible and they can be dangerous, so.
Kind of similar reasons eucalyptus honey. But that has much stronger flavor that you probably don't want.
You wouldn't be drawn to it. So yews, very, very common hedge plant. The trees are slow growing, the hedges are not. Your constant battle around here, keeping the hedges in check. What's really funny about the yew plant is that pretty much everything in it is toxic,
Except the red berries.
Yeah. Which is really strange, but the seed, the black seed inside the red berry is highly toxic.
Yep.
So if you eat the red berry and spit out the seed, okay.
Just don't eat the berries.
But again, it's probably better off just not eating the berries.
And if you've ever squished one,
No, you
it
didn't.
doesn't look like anything I'd ever want to put in my mouth. It has this stringy, phlegmy, ugh.
I had a professor in Cornell for our horticulture class, and when he was presenting yews, he was saying how toxic they were and the seeds were toxic. And he says, well, the berries aren't toxic, but he goes, they taste kind of like glue, like a sweet glue. You probably don't want to eat them anyway. And this professor, you ever hear the phrase older than dirt? That was your impression of the guy. And we knew that 3 years prior to him teaching our class, he had had a stroke. And there's a book written by, I forget the guy's first name, but the last name is Durr, and it's the Horticulture Bible for woody, ornamental plants. He knew every word of it. And he told us that when he had the stroke, he forgot most of it and had to relearn it. But by the time we were back in class, he knew every word. And yeah, so when he said they tasted like glue, I assumed he had tasted them personally. He just got that impression. But again, probably better off not eating the berries, because even though these berries are okay, the seed inside them, not so much. There's been some studies that the poisons in this might actually have a medicinal purpose in fighting cancer. There's been some research into it. So, it would be nice to see something good come of it. But, what's very fascinating to me is that toxins and medicines are so closely related. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is application, quantity, what it's mixed with. To say that something is poisonous, there's also the potential there for it to be a cure for something. But great care and caution has to be exercised. Aconite. So another popular garden plant, very beautiful, really pretty, also called monkshood or wolfsbane. It contains an alkaloid that paralyzes the nerves and stops the heart. Probably not something you want to eat. This is one where skin contact can bring on cardiac symptoms. Again, for everybody in the population, probably not, but a fairly large portion of the population, if you're handling it, you could end up with a...
Notice all of these chemicals are named after the plant they come from. Atropine, caffeine. But caffeine basically means stuff found in coffee.
I transplant them all the time. I just wash my hands real good after I do it.
Yeah.
I have heard that this plant is closely related to horseradish. You know if that's true?
Yes, the root looks similar.
Okay.
The root, I don't think it's related, but it has a similar looking root.
Okay.
Which is why some people may have been tempted to nibble on it. Not recommended.
Do you know the legend of how they got to be poisonous?
No.
Because they supposedly grew at the gates to hell, or Hades, or whatever.
Okay.
And Cerberus, the three-headed dog, had something to do with the story, because apparently he was barking and got angry or something, and his slobber went on these plants, and they turned that color, and then they became poisonous.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay.
It's a term wolfsbane.
Doggle flower.
Foxglove. Another heart medication. Digitalis.
Digitalis.
Again, popular garden flower. It's the source of digitalis, which is used to make the heart drug of the same name. It can cause some minor things like rashes. It can cause some major things like delirium and tremors, and it can bring on headaches just through skin contact, and it can cause fatal heart problems if ingested. So this is one, you want to keep it away when you're in your garden. You don't want to plant it right next to the lettuce. You don't want to accidentally grab a leaf of that and have it find its way into your salad. Just saying, might want to show a little caution there. So that was really the last one. Does anyone have any questions or comments or thoughts about your own experience with plants that maybe aren't as friendly as others? No? So no samples after this workshop.
No.
My husband was teasing me quite a bit when I was preparing for the one I did with Jen and for this one. He goes, "Don't get your samples mixed up." And I said, no, the only samples for one workshop.
So we want to do is send people home with samples of monkshood.
Yeah, no, like little vials of distilled belladonna, no, wasn't going to be handled.
If it has beautiful flowers and it grows in the shade, it's probably poisonous.
That is good. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of ones. Lily of the Valley. I love Lily of the Valley. It grows all over my yard, but it's poisonous. The berries especially. Again, don't eat the berries. Don't eat the berries, don't eat the mushrooms. Wash your hands.
If you want to sample wormwood, you should have been around last night.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, thank you, everybody. Anybody that wants just a handout that's basically the presentation, I've got some stacked up front here. You can help yourselves. And we'll probably be posting this on the website. And if you get a chance to, I do really recommend the book, Wicked Plants, because it's a really good read. She writes it in a very narrative language. It makes makes learning a lot of this stuff a lot of fun. So, thanks.
Thank you.